Well, week 9 brought a ton of wild and wacky finishes, and it gave the college football playoff committee a lot to think about before their first rankings this week. We're here live to break it all down right here on the 3 Technique.
One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Welcome in, everybody. We are live right here on Saturday night to break down everything that happened on week 9. I'm joined by Garrett Turney and Drew Hull from the Southern Boys Sports Podcast. Drew, it is great to have you on the show, my man. How you doing tonight?
Dude, I'm doing pretty good. Tennessee fan over here. I know you guys are from Texas, but Tennessee fan picked up the win by 6 points. A couple near heart attacks were involved, but happy to get the win, and I'm excited to be on. So thanks for having me on tonight.
Absolutely, man. We're fired up to have Drew on the show tonight. It's the first time we've had a guest from another podcast to come join us on the breakdown. Garrett's with me tonight as well. Mitch is taking a well-deserved break to save his voice after high school football last night and taking in a game in person today. Garrett, baseball didn't go our way today, but that's okay. We had a ton of college football to distract us. How are we feeling as we're trying to dissect week 9 here?
See, how we're feeling is whenever we do well in baseball, we find little ways to slip it into the show. We find little ways to make references and then say, we're a college football show, but let's talk a little baseball first. Oh, look, the Raiders, da-da-da. But I don't want to talk about the Rangers tonight because it didn't go our way. So we're a college football show. We're going to stick to college football tonight.
Exactly. All I'll say is we're a road team. Rangers in 6. We're fine. We're still well on track.
It's okay.
We're still well on track for that. But this is not a baseball show, as you said. This is a college football show. And there's plenty to talk about tonight as week 9 really delivered. Every single window had hard-hitting action. The morning window, I think, was my personal favorite of the night. But we still have some games that are going final right now that could challenge that. Some wild and wacky finishes as well. Before we get started, let me do some housekeeping here. This show and every show is brought to you by our friends over at the Transfer Portal CFB. Check out our article that'll drop tomorrow, breaking down all the storylines, anything you might have missed. And check out all the great writing that goes on from our friends over at the Transfer Portal CFB. And we're also brought to you by our friends at Home Field Apparel. We've been telling you guys all year, if you haven't found out yet, you can get 15% off using code 3TechPod if you're a first-time order, or if you're a return order, you can use the link in our Twitter bio to make sure that you get that discount as well. Season's starting to turn. It's bomber jacket season over at Home Field. They just dropped a collection of 19, I think, that look absolutely fantastic. So I'm sure that your team is represented. They've got all the top teams, retro logos, the coolest looking shirts on the market, and they feel fantastic too. So make sure that you're checking out our friends over at Home Field. Again, code 3TechPod for 15% off your first order. Gentlemen, now that the bills are paid, let's jump right in it. Let's start with the wildest and wackiest game of the day, in my opinion. We had the Kansas Jayhawks on homecoming. A lot of people question, why are you having Oklahoma for homecoming? That's a really bold choice. And look,
They knew what they were doing.
It was rocking in Lawrence. Kansas 38, Oklahoma 33. We had a second quarter rain delay with 7 minutes left. Kansas was up 14-7, had all the momentum. They could have had that taken away. They have to go in the locker room for about an hour. They get 5 minutes to warm up, and Oklahoma immediately punches them back. Goes up 21-14, but these two teams just traded blows all afternoon. It was a fantastic display of offensive firepower. Not a lot of defense being played, but some opportunistic stops made by both teams. And guys, Kansas was almost dead in the water, but they really battled after 2 straight interceptions. They scored a touchdown with 55 seconds left. When they scored that touchdown, I was worried because I thought they left a little bit too much time on the clock for Dylan Gabriel and the Sooners. Dylan Gabriel drives back down the field, but the last attempt in the end zone falls incomplete. And this is a really streaky team. But when that offense is clicking, they are I think, legitimately one of the best teams in the Big 12. What do you guys think about this game today? Does it hurt Oklahoma's playoff chances? How should Sooner fans, how should Jayhawks fans be feeling after this wild one?
Well, I mean, obviously it's going to hurt their playoff chances because now they got to be perfect on the way out, right? If they're not perfect on the way out, if they don't win their conference and then get a little bit of help, then I mean, Oklahoma, sorry about you. Kansas just ruined another season. And can we go ahead and just acknowledge that for a second? Kansas being good at football, I think, is just kind of filling out the country and filling up this void that we're going to have. There's this void. Everyone's talking SEC, Big Ten, mega conferences. Let's talk about, are they going to who's going to pick up James Madison, right? And so we're talking about like all these different things about what's coming next for college football. And we're starting to see some of these Big 12 teams really figure it out. And Kansas is lead among some of them. Put together a great performance today. Obviously, the weather was weird. Obviously, with the rain and the cold and everything else, it didn't stop their fans from jumping in the pond. So there's a whole thing.
That was awesome.
It was really, really cool, setting the tone from the very beginning. Mello Dotson with the pick six and just getting to set that tone and say, look, we're Kansas. We're going to play our game. We're not going to let you come into our house and just steamroll us. And they did their thing. And there were so many moments for them to crash and burn, right? Coming out, 14-7, and then you got to go sit in your locker room. Oklahoma gets a chance to talk about what you've been doing. They come out, they score a bunch of points. You go into the half trailing. And so you could have very easily let that affect you. You could have let that become a thing where now all of a sudden we're in our heads. Oklahoma's better than us. Oh, well, we came out sharp and it just fell apart. But then they come back. And for me, where the game turned was the third quarter fumble where it's just a kind of a sloppy play from Dylan Gabriel, fumbles the football. And then, Kansas guys following it. Very next play, Bean takes off down the side and scores on a long touchdown run. This kind of turned it into like, okay, well, we lost all of our momentum into, all right, let's have this. Let's do this dogfight, right? And that's where I think the momentum turned a little bit. But you got to give credit to Kansas because they played a great game, never backed down. They didn't quit. They didn't give up. And you gotta give them credit for that. There's a heck of a game for Kansas, and their fans clearly appreciated it. And it's them celebrating tonight more than anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, I gotta agree with you as well. I mean, if you look at the turnovers here, 3 turnovers to 3 turnovers, but you mentioned it, that Jaleel Farouk fumble in the third quarter definitely kind of felt like the momentum turned from there. Jason Bean, long touchdown run. Fans were kind of fired up. So obviously the turnovers definitely, I feel like even though Kansas turned the ball over 3 times, Kansas also got the most opportune turnovers. Obviously that kick return fumble late in the game, the fumble in the third quarter. And Jason Bean did his job. He's never going to be a game-breaking quarterback, but he can take off with his legs. Threw 2 interceptions. He threw that one right to the defensive lineman, and obviously those kind of things hurt. Yeah. And I think if Jalen Daniels was out there, it could have been a little bit of a different game as well. But nonetheless, if you're Kansas, winning games, big games against top 10 teams with Jason Bean at quarterback definitely feels like a win inside of a win. And Devin Neal, I feel like kind of did their thing tonight. And defense did good enough. And like I said, turnover battle, even though it's even on paper, felt like the momentum turnovers, that battle was won by Kansas.
Yeah. And, I think back to Kansas last year, and there was such a fantastic story in college football, but you just knew if they're going to knock off a big boy, if they're going to have an upset that sends shockwaves to the college football world, like beating number 6 Oklahoma today, they had to basically play a perfect game on offense because they knew their defense wasn't going to be much of a help. Their defense still is, significantly dragging behind the offense in Lawrence, but, it's opportunistic, right? They start the game with a pick 6, and that really sets the tone for the rest of the day. They have 2 other takeaways throughout the day to over-counter Jason Bean's 3 turnovers. And it was just good complementary football when they really needed it. It was bend but don't break on defense, but that was exactly what they needed. The offense was humming. They made a really, really solid Oklahoma defense look silly at times. And yeah, it was just a fantastic win for the Kansas Jayhawks. I do want to shift the discussion a little bit over to Oklahoma because Kansas, biggest win of the season for them. They're bowl eligible at 6-2. I think they can definitely win at least 2 of their last 4. They're at Iowa State, Texas Tech, and Kansas State at home before finishing the season at Cincinnati. But Oklahoma's season now is, like you said off the top, Garrett, they have no more margin for error. They have Bedlam next week in Stillwater. It's the last Bedlam for who knows how long. So the fans in Stillwater are going to be fired up for that one. They return home for West Virginia. They go to Provo, a really difficult place to play, to take on BYU, and then they close out the season at home against TCU. The margin for error is obviously 0, but what chances do you guys have right now, sitting here Saturday night, of them getting back to the Big 12 championship game with just this one loss?
I would say if they can get past Oklahoma State and Bedlam, they're fine, because I don't think that BYU is a good enough team. And I don't think that they play enough good teams down the stretch. And I don't think that Oklahoma State's necessarily there. But let me tell you what, last couple of weeks with Air Gordon, right? OG2 as they're calling him in the booth, but Air Gordon is the locals nickname for him. Ollie Gordon II, tees up, baby. They found something with him. Right, they've absolutely found something there. He had another monster night tonight. We'll talk about that game in a little bit. But when you start to find it and you start to get hot like that, you get a player who's just on fire. He can take over games and change games. So Oklahoma's going to have to come in and do a good job stopping the run. Not something they did very well today against Kansas. Right, Kansas rushed for over 200 yards. If they can't stop the run against Oklahoma State gets to kind of ball control this thing. I think that could be danger in Stillwater, because those fans are going to be crazy, like you were saying, Trey. Like, they're going to be crazy. They don't know when the next game is. They feel slighted that Oklahoma's leaving the conference and not even making space for them in the schedule. They feel like they've done something, that's egregious. And maybe whether they're right or wrong, that's not to say. But it is a dangerous spot to play in a rivalry game on the road, when the other team's doing something you haven't proven on defense you're very good at stopping. So if they can get past Oklahoma State, I think that they can go ahead and run to the Big 12 championship game. Now, what happens when they get there, I'm gonna let that wait for December. But I think they can get there. They just have to get past the rivalry game.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that. I mean, obviously, I guess the goal for Oklahoma after they beat Texas, for Oklahoma fans at least, when over on my show, me and my buddy, he's an Oklahoma fan, and I can tell you the outlook from that program was just, okay, we're just going to win out and get back to the Big 12 championship, and that's the game that's going to matter. And obviously Kansas comes in, that kind of bites them in the butt. And then, like you said, Oklahoma State, Ollie Gordon, Oklahoma did not look good stopping the run against Devin Neal today, gave up over 100 yards. So Oklahoma State's sneaky 6-2. They're not that bad of a football team. They've looked shaky in a couple games, but they're really not that bad. Not to mention West Virginia. They kind of stay sneaking in. Big win over UCF, which is something obviously Oklahoma couldn't do 2 weeks ago. So I don't know. I mean, there's definitely a uncertainty around Oklahoma's program. And I guess any college football fan can relate. After a close game and then a loss like that, where your team kind of looks shaky and looks bad, the confidence level definitely drops as a fan. And like, can we win out? Can we beat BYU? I mean, BYU is not that bad, like, all that good stuff. But I do think they win out. If they can beat Texas in the Big 12 championship, like you said, Garrett, we're just going to have to wait and see on that one. But Oklahoma State next week, like you said, very big game on the road. And then West Virginia, another game that I would look out for. But definitely playoff chances still alive. Big 12 championship chances more than alive.
Well, for all you sickos out there, there's currently a 5-way tie at 4-1 at the top of the Big 12. Sign me up for November, baby. This conference, even losing Oklahoma and Texas next year, is going to be fantastic to follow. Yep. Guys, we should have given Kansas the respect to include them in our Big 3 in our preview show. We apologize to the Jayhawks and that's why we had them lead off the show today. We wanted to give them the respect they were due. They should have been in the Big 3, because our Big 3 ended up being 3 big blowouts today. We highlighted, coming into the week, we highlighted Oregon, Utah, we highlighted Texas, BYU, and we highlighted Georgia, Florida in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Guys, let's start out west. Let's start with Oregon and Utah. It was rocking in Salt Lake City from an early morning start at College Game Day. Pat McAfee was making like dozens of soaking jokes about BYU, and it was a fantastic atmosphere the whole day.
Just egregious.
Oregon, it was out of pocket the entire time. It was fantastic. If you don't know what that is, Google it, but have safe search on maybe. Oregon, for the game on the field, Oregon really came out firing hot and just immediately stated themselves as the better team. I think USC, this kind of proves that USC is kind of the cure for the common offense, right? Utah's offense has not looked very cohesive outside of the USC game last week. I think that says more about USC's defense than anything. And Oregon really proved that today. Oregon's defense set the tone. Their offense came out firing hot. And if you look at the total numbers, like you see on the screen right now, right? 390 total yards, 248 through the air, 142 on the ground. Not wowing you with the numbers on offense, but the score is certainly wowing you, right? Going into Salt Lake City, a notoriously difficult place to play at altitude. And Oregon just bullied the Utes up front on offense and defense. They got whatever they wanted in the running game most of the game, just did whatever they wanted to do. So, and stat that Garrett pulled, this is a fantastic stat. This is the first time Utah hasn't scored a touchdown since 2018. Oregon looks like a very complete team, guys, and I'm really interested to see where they end up in the college football playoff rankings this week, because I saw a lot of chatter that maybe Washington and Oregon both deserve to be top 4. I think Oregon's 5 or 6 at worst at this point after this performance today. What stood out to you guys? What impressed you about the Ducks in Salt Lake City?
Yeah, I think you have to put them on the screen at the very least on this next playoff round. They got to be on the screen somewhere. If it's not 1 through 6 somewhere, then I think that's just disrespectful. Because to this point, Oregon, I think, has looked the best in the majority of their wins. They don't really have any like super sloppy wins where you just felt like, they were lucky to escape and survive. They haven't always been dominant.
They put up 81 earlier in the
Right.
season.
Yeah.
They put up 81 points. So
right. I mean, the borderline, abuse of a worse program. And then it's funny to see what they ended up doing later on to someone else's Who Cares School of the Blind. They even put up like 90 something or whatever. It was crazy. But regardless, no, Oregon, look, they've looked really, really good. And I don't think that Oregon's defense gets nearly enough credit for what they're doing. They took what had just been kind of a breakout offense. We had talked, all week. Sione Vaki, he's the guy. He's the two-way guy. We're going to see him show up. Wasn't really a factor in this one. I mean, almost nobody for Utah was a factor in this one. Bryson Barnes, breakout day, doing it with the legs, being a hero, finding a way. He didn't do very much either. I mean, they didn't even rush for 100 yards in this game. And so, to me, when I look at this, Oregon's defense has to have a lot of credit. When you watch the game, they were just aggressive. They were setting the edges. They didn't let Utah get outside. And they just did a really, really good job of playing good team defense. There's not necessarily one guy that's just the absolute star, right? They have stars on their defense, but there's not one guy who's doing it and then everybody else, right? Like when I think Florida State, it's Jared Verse, right? He's the star. He's the superstar. He's going top 5, top 10. And then there's all the rest of the defense who kind of plays around him, good team defense. Oregon has several solid pieces across this front. And I think that they're going to be a hard-to-beat team going out because they're starting to figure out, and I think they got their mindset back, right? They're starting to figure out how to play this game with that killer instinct. You saw it for minutes there, didn't really have it against Washington, kind of struggled to get it back, and now we see it again, right? We're seeing the killer instinct to get after it, stomp on their throats, right? Do what you got to do. And I think if that mindset continues, this is going to be a really dangerous team that we have to talk about as a possible shot at the playoff.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I don't know if somebody already mentioned it. I think somebody did. But just the overall arc of the game was just Oregon from the beginning, right? Just bullied them throughout the whole game. And if you want to look at fourth downs, right, Utah was forced into going for it 3 times on fourth downs. They're forced into way more third downs than Oregon is. It just felt like they were kind of playing catch up the whole game. Bryson Barnes throws 2 interceptions. It was just a sloppy game for Utah. Obviously didn't score a touchdown like you mentioned earlier. And Bo Nix just seems to be kind of cruising. Very consistent game today. 2 touchdowns, over 200 yards, look pretty good. Overall, like you said, I mean, Oregon is just a team that I think this has got to keep winning. Obviously, that loss to Washington on the road definitely hurts. But a potential rematch we could see in the Pac-12 championship, and I know we'll get to that. But Oregon, I agree with you, Garrett. I know a lot of people are kind of sleeping on them and maybe putting them behind a few teams that they shouldn't be behind. Despite the loss, I still think Oregon is undoubtedly a top 6 team in the country and should have a spot at the playoff, even with the 1 loss. And the Pac-12 playoff will play or Pac-12 championship will play a big piece of whether or not they get in the playoff. But Oregon, I've been notoriously high on Oregon all year. I still favor them and like them a little bit more than Washington, especially after the Arizona State game Washington played a couple weeks ago, the Stanford game they just got through with. So right now it just looks like Oregon's kind of dominating teams. They're keeping winning. Tough loss to Washington. But I really do like Oregon. They're going to bump up in the rankings after Oklahoma lost as well. So that should help them out a little bit.
Totally agree. And you took the words right out of my mouth, Drew. These two teams, Oregon and Washington, it does seem like they're on a collision course for the Pac-12 championship. Obviously, a lot of stuff could happen. There's rivalry games still to be played. This is another conference that's log jammed at the top with a lot of really good teams. But Oregon and Washington certainly seem to be moving in different directions after that game. Washington gets the big emotional win. And to Washington's credit, they've won the clunker games, right? They have figured out a way to win those difficult games on the road. But they certainly don't look as impressive as they did before the Oregon game. So I think, Drew, you kind of hinted at it. But if the game's played next week on a neutral field in Las Vegas, who would you guys take right now, Oregon or Washington?
If I had to pick today, I'm going to pick Oregon to win against Washington on a neutral field. I think it's hard to beat people twice. It's hard to, beat the same team twice, especially if they're good. And both these teams are really good. But, Trey, you're right. Washington's kind of been moving in the wrong direction since that game. They've kind of been moving away from being good. They've been moving away from being really solid. Penix has put up some questionable performances, and it looks like all that loss did for Oregon was kind of piss them off and get them ready. So when I look at this, I think Oregon on a neutral field, I think their fans will travel a little bit better. It's not to disrespect the Washington fans. I think Oregon's a little bit of a bigger brand nationally. And if they were to play in the Pac-12 championship game, I'd pick Oregon, and I think that puts them solidly in the playoff.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with you. I definitely do I'll pick Oregon here as well. But Washington, from I guess a collegiate athlete standpoint, you're coming in and you're playing 1-5 Arizona State, and then you're playing 2-5 Stanford. So obviously, understandably so, you're not really getting up for that game like you are. Packed out house in Seattle, game days there, big rival game against Oregon. The energy in that game was just a little bit different. You're playing Pac-12 at night, and the atmosphere is just not really the same at Stanford on the road at 6 o'clock at night as it is obviously at home in Seattle. So I'll cut them a little bit of slack. I'll still take Oregon because giving up 33 points to Stanford doesn't look too good. Giving up, it was just a sloppy first half against Arizona State. Penix threw 2 interceptions. So I don't know. I'm going to roll with Oregon. I'm going to agree with you. Defense looks pretty good, and they just stomped Utah, so it's hard not to pick them. But Washington, definitely a team that feels like they have potential to win the games when they matter. Still have USC. They got USC next week and still have Oregon State. So I guess they'll run the test of time. We'll see how they perform in big games before that Oregon game. But yeah, I'm going to agree with Garrett. I'm going to roll with Oregon.
I think that's a great point. I think it is okay to give 18 to 22-year-olds a little bit of grace when their competition level drops off just a little bit. It's easy to lose focus. I'll pick with my heart. I'll say Washington still has the edge slightly. I just love Michael Penix Jr. and just the whole offensive weapons that they have. It's going to be a fantastic game if that is what we end up getting in Las Vegas in December. Oregon's remaining schedule to close out November. They've got Cal at home next week before they host USC. They go to Arizona State, which all of a sudden is a tricky game. We'll talk more about that a little bit before closing out with the Civil War Platypus Cup, whatever you want to call it, on Black Friday. And guys, moving across the country, a couple other blowouts that we highlighted in our preview show. Texas 35, BYU 6. No Quinn Ewers, no problem for the Longhorns. It was the defense show. It was the, Malik Murphy put on a really, really solid performance coming off the bench and getting his first career start. And Garrett, I think you wanted to highlight the drive chart for us in this game. So I will let you do the honors here. If you have that pulled up, I can stall and do live radio if you need me to.
Give me a half a second here.
Well, I'll talk more a little bit about the Longhorns. Home got set with Xavier Worthy's punt return because it was another slightly slow start. I hesitate to say that a little bit, but it was another slightly slow start for the Longhorns. Xavier Worthy put that to bed with his long punt return touchdown that really ignited the crowd, really kind of got the nerves off. I think that entire Longhorn sideline, they were waiting for somebody to make a play. He took the bull by the horns, bad pun intended, and just really put the team on his back early. So a fantastic showing from the Longhorns. We thought that BYU had the chance to keep it close. I don't think BYU ever wants to go to the state of Texas again, even though they joined a conference with a lot of Texas teams, because they've just started so poorly the couple of times that they've traveled into the Lone Star State this year. But yeah, Garrett, hit us with that magic.
Yeah, so the thing with this drive chart, and this is really why I want to bring it up, was Texas in this game, watching it was so frustrating because I felt like Malik Murphy, he didn't play all that bad, but there was some inconsistencies. Obviously, he had, the pick and the fumble, but it just felt like there was so much more on the field. And when they took the ball out of his hands and just gave it to the running backs, they didn't have an issue moving the ball. But I wanted to highlight the drive chart. So you start punt, and then you get the punt from BYU that results in you getting the 7 from Worthy returning it. Then you have a pick, a touchdown, a fumble, and a touchdown. That's your drive charts for Texas real quick in the first half. That's up and down. That's just inconsistency. Longhorn fans, punching air because they're just like, dang it, can we just string 2 good drives in the same? Nope, can't do it. Okay, you come back out of the half, you get the 3 and out, and then you go 3 and out. BYU kicks a field goal, you go downs, and the problem with that was a goal line stand for BYU where you basically ran whatever you wanted to until you got to the end zone. Then on the very next drive, you have another turnover on downs on 3 where they just couldn't punch it in again. And so there's 2 straight turnover on downs. Yeah. They finally get the touch. There's a pick on the drive and they get a 8-yard touchdown on the very next play. And then they punt and they score another touchdown when it didn't really matter anymore. And that was the game. And so, man, this game was, and I'm not a Longhorn fan, but I can't imagine being a Longhorn fan watching this game thinking we look so good in the run game. Jonathan Brooks, he's doing his thing, but man, we just cannot string good drives together. Malik Murphy, inconsistent. There's some really good throws in that game. There were some bad throws in that game. There's some throws where I thought he could have led his guy a little bit better, given him a better chance to run after the catch or something. But overall, I think, Trey, the reason we put this in our big 3 was because we thought that this was a possibility for Texas to drop because this is what they do in the past. Something goes wrong, a player gets hurt, the quarterback goes down, a bad team comes to town and beats you on a sleepy Saturday. And that didn't happen this time. So credit to Texas, credit to Sark and Co. for putting a good game plan around Malik Murphy to get him in the best situation so he could succeed. They put 35 points on the board. The offense put, 28, but they put up points on the board. They got what they needed to, and that defense showed up and played really, really well against BYU.
Yeah. And I mean, you hate to be that guy. You do. But it was a good win against BYU. Caden Slovis is just really middle of the pack type of quarterback. Threw 2 interceptions. You mentioned it. Every time I looked up, Caden Slovis was running 12-yard backwards, running for his life against the Texas D-line. I think it was like 10-plus TFLs, 2 interceptions, a bunch of pass deflections. It was just a really sloppy game on offense from BYU. And you don't really – to Texas's, I guess, good graces, you don't play another great offense for the rest of the year. So you're not really worried about an offense at Iowa State. I think they're going to be able to shut that offense down. TCU. And I actually picked Texas Tech to be in the Big 12 championship preseason, and they're sitting at 3-5. So yeah, it's not looking too good for me.
Good company, or maybe bad company. I don't know.
Yeah. But I don't know. I'm interested to see Malik Murphy probably going to start it definitely for Kansas State. The game at Kansas State. I know it was started 2 to 4 weeks, I think, from Quinn Ewers. So we'll see where he finishes up on that. But just a really sloppy game offensively from BYU. A competent offense against that Texas defense. I feel like could have moved the ball just a little bit better. But nonetheless, defensively, I feel like Texas definitely played well enough to win. Malik Murphy run game, like you mentioned, Garrett, definitely left a lot on the table. I feel like they could have definitely dropped 50 points or more. They were driving the ball very well. And but overall, Malik Murphy, about what you'd expect through the air, 2 touchdowns, and Jonathan Brooks, Jaden Blue, Keelan Robinson, their running back room's really good. So the run game is definitely something to fall back on. Got a couple true freshmen, a couple guys who have been in the room. Jonathan Brooks, obviously a very good running back. So it helps if you're Steve Sarkisian in Texas that you have a really, really good running back room. But you mentioned it today, didn't really get going like they should. And to beat Kansas State, to win these gritty games in the Big 12 going down the stretch, run game is definitely going to have to come alive.
Yeah, you guys said it well. I'll just add that this is life with a backup quarterback. And contrary to what a lot of Texas fans said they wanted coming out of spring football and coming out of even fall camp, there were a lot of people clamoring for Malik Murphy because of an Instagram picture. And this is life with a backup quarterback. There's a reason that Quinn Ewers was your starter, and Sark knows what he's doing when he's picking a starting quarterback. So this is what you get with a backup quarterback as he's learning the ropes, as he's learning it on the fly. You just got to hope that he makes more plays than he does mistakes, because there's going to be a few mistakes, especially as the defensive pressure turns up. I don't think anyone's confusing BYU with an elite defense this year. And next week you have the Kansas State Wildcats coming to town in a battle for first place in the Big 12. So Kansas State at TCU, at Iowa State, Texas Tech at home to close out the year for the Longhorns. They've got to win out to be on a collision course with an Oklahoma rematch to have a shot at the college football playoff. And as you guys have mentioned, they're going to have to do a lot of that with Malik Murphy at the helm. Let's go over to our last big headliner game today. World's largest outdoor cocktail party in Jacksonville. Georgia 43, Florida 20. And the rumors of Georgia's demise, guys, have been greatly exaggerated, because even without Brock Bowers, the offense was humming. Carson Beck played a fantastic game, 19 of 28, 315 and 2. And the Georgia run game was just really, really good. Ladd McConkey stepped up really well to fill that void left by Brock Bowers, 6 receptions for 135 yards and a touchdown. And guys, they answered a lot of questions, right? Florida goes up 7-0. You're thinking, oh boy, Gators punch first. This could be a dogfight for Georgia. But then after that, Georgia scores 36 unanswered to go up 36-7 and leave no doubt of who the best team on the field is.
They did Georgia things.
Georgia,
Yeah.
We've been waiting for them. They've shown flashes, right? We talked about the slow starts. We've talked about, they have their oopsie game against Auburn where they're giving up tons of rushing yards. But I highlighted it on the preview show. That Auburn game was such an outlier on the ground. Whatever Auburn found schematically, or whatever Georgia was just distracted by that day, or chalk it up to a rivalry game, whatever you want. That game was such an outlier. This was the only other time, save for, I think, week 1 when the backups were playing, that Georgia's given up over 100 yards this year, and they gave up 109. So a Florida team that really wants to establish the run. So we highlighted it. I was expecting Georgia to come out and prove some people wrong this week. It was going to be difficult without Brock Bowers, but they have so much talent that it was hard to believe that no one would step up.
Yeah, and shout out Ladd McConkey for being the guy, right? He decided, you know what, this is going to be my moment, right? No,
They've kind of been waiting for him to do that too. He hadn't really had a big breakout game this season.
Yeah, and he's looked good in the past, and he's had some big performances in the playoff and doing what he needs to do there. But man, like it seemed like he would kind of dragging a little bit. This whole Georgia offense was dragging a little bit this year. You'd see him perform against bad teams after a sleepy first quarter, and then they turn it back up, and you're like, okay, well, I guess Georgia kind of did it. But I just kind of feel like something's missing. This is the first game I feel like, to me, when I was watching them play, I felt like Georgia kind of looked back. It kind of looked like Georgia again. They weren't maybe as sharp on defense in certain spots, towards the end of the game. And you could say it was backups. They didn't care. They're just trying to finish the game or whatever. But this is the first time on offense I thought, okay, Georgia's starting to roll a little bit. This is the first time I thought Carson Beck really impressed me with his ability to win the game with his arm, and specifically just not with Brock Bowers. That was the big point, was what happens when you take your all-world talented tight end. That was something that I highlighted in the preview, as I said, okay, well, what happens if you get down, 10-0, 14-0 to Florida, and you don't have your big play guy to catch you up? The run game ain't going to do it. Well, turns out you didn't need the run game to do it. They had a good game on the ground. They rushed for plenty of yards and several scores, but man, it was Ladd McConkey. It was the rest of that offense just getting things going. And you got to shout out Carson Beck. He had a great game. and I think restored a lot of confidence in that Georgia program that they can compete nationally.
Yeah. I mean, Georgia, it was a tough game for me because obviously Tennessee already lost to Florida. I'm not rooting for Florida, but it would help if Georgia could lose a game prior to Tennessee. So, maybe we could make a late Hail Mary run for the SEC title game. But anyways, it was a good game for Georgia. And I think my biggest takeaway from this game, obviously Georgia did look back. That's at least what the people are saying. And, they did look good. But I think the biggest takeaway has got to be Georgia kind of discerning themselves, and you mentioned it just a little bit, Garrett, from being a great team this year and being a good team this year. Because you lose Brock Bowers. You have a guy in Oscar Delp who steps up 2 receptions, plays a pretty good game blocking-wise. You also have receivers who were able to step up, fill his void receiving-wise. Carson Beck finds a new favorite target in Ladd McConkey, hits a couple other guys. And so you just have guys in line. And when it's not Brock Bowers, it's another draft pick and another draft pick and another scrappy wide receiver who's able to fill that void. For example, let's take a team like Missouri, right? If Missouri loses Luther Burden, I'm sure Mookie Cooper, Theo Weiss, maybe they can do the job. Mm-hmm. But at Georgia, there's no question about it. That's what makes them a really great team is that you've got 3 or 4 more guys who are former 5-stars. You've got DeJuan Edwards and Kendall Milton, a very underrated running back room to hand to. And so it's just a very deep team. It's hard to find a hole, even without, a Heisman contender for, some part of the year at tight end, which is extremely hard to do. That shows how talented he was. But Dominic Lovett, the Missouri transfer, Oscar Delp, Ladd McConkey, like we mentioned, all kind of stepped up. Carson Beck played really well as well. So they're definitely back. Definitely, as a Tennessee fan, not looking forward to them and Missouri back-to-back weeks. But yeah, Georgia gets the job done. It was a surprising comeback from Georgia, just running all over them, just 26 straight points. No problem.
Well, it's a fascinating close to the regular season for the Bulldogs. They've got a surprising heavyweight bout next week when they take on Missouri at home. Missouri's still with only 1 loss this year. Then they have Ole Miss, another team with only 1 loss, and then they go to Neyland to take on the Tennessee Volunteers before finishing at Georgia Tech in the good, clean, old-fashioned hate. So it's put up or shut up time for the Bulldogs. Everybody's been doubting you because of a weak schedule all year. Those doubts will be over if they can keep going through the rest of this unscathed. Guys, before we move on to a couple other, not like headliner games, but definitely ones we want to point out, let's pause because I forgot to do this off the top. We've talked about the top games. Where are we at? Let's make a prediction really quickly. Top 4 ranking prediction this week in the college football playoff rankings, and then give me your first 2 out. Drew, we'll start with you.
Okay. All right. So I guess I'm going to approach this in a way where I'm going to try and predict what the committee is going to do and shy away from exactly what I would do because that's probably a little bit different. I'm going to stick with Georgia at 1. I think it's hard to shy away from a team that's back-to-back national champions, haven't lost a game, looked very good this week without their best player. 2, Michigan. I know they were kind of talking about it in the chat, but obviously the Michigan investigation and stuff like that, hopefully that wouldn't, derail the committee from putting them at number 2. I don't think it will. Number 3, I'm going to roll with Ohio State. I feel like the Buckeyes have the resume probably above any other team in the country, and they feel like they're somewhat legit, obviously kind of in a grudge match against Wisconsin tonight. I would still favor Georgia and Michigan over them right now, but they do have the resume, beat 2 top 25 teams. Number 4 is definitely tough for me. I think number 4 is kind of the toughest spot. I'm probably going to go with Washington just because they're unbeaten. It's tough for me to put Washington at anywhere outside of the top 4. If it was me personally, I'd probably throw FSU in there. But I don't think they'll it's just hard to decide. I think they put Washington in there. And then I think Florida State and Oregon are going to be my first 2 out. 4, 5, and 6 all have really 3 through 6 is just open season. It's really hard to predict as of right now. College football playoff, the back half of it, at least how it stands right now, is definitely wide open.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about how the committee feels about that. I think that's probably where they're going. For me, I'm going to say screw the committee for a second. I'm just going to do my own thing. So if it were up to me, if I was the college football playoff czar and it was just my decision, which of course I would obviously get that right, and there's no problems with my judgment, I'm going to go Michigan at 1 because I think they're the best team right now. They haven't had any real blemishes. They haven't done anything so far that's made me really worried about them. I pick Georgia at number 2. You know, they're the 2-time champions. They're still looking pretty good, but they have had some of those slow starts, looked a lot better against Florida. One more slow start, and I might have slid them down to 3, but I think I'm going to slide them to number 2 with that big win over Florida. Number 3, I'm going to pick Florida State. Okay, Florida State, I think, has looked really, really good. I think they've fought a lot harder. I think they've had to go through more tough teams so far and have come out unscathed. And then I'd probably pick Ohio State at 4. I think you're absolutely right, Drew. They got the resume. They got what they need. They have the big wins, the marquee wins. That means I'm going to leave Washington just slightly on the outside at 5, and I'm going to put Oregon right behind them at 6. Yeah, Washington, undefeated. I get it. Someone's got to be left out at the moment, and you just haven't looked that good for a couple of weeks. So that's going to be my top 4 plus the next 2 out. And if the committee wants to disagree, then, they can at me, I guess.
Yeah, Personally, I'm going to put Georgia number 1. I think they proved a lot in the last few weeks. And, not just this week. They throttled Kentucky. They looked, really good against Vanderbilt. I know it's Vandy, but they looked really good against Vanderbilt as well. I'm going to put Georgia at 1, Michigan 2, Ohio State 3. And then in my 4 spot, I'm also going to go Florida State. I think they've done just a little bit more than Washington at this point. Washington's look really good, but Florida State has more quality wins. And they, people have been talking about them falling asleep at the wheel. You have to get up by a lot of points to fall asleep at the wheel and almost let a team back in the game, right? So, when they're at their best, they look almost unbeatable with Jordan Travis driving that ship. I'll put Washington at 5 and Oregon at 6, right on the cusp, and giving Washington the slight edge because they won head-to-head. But it's going to be fascinating to see what they do. And even behind that, through the top 10 or 12, it's going to be really fascinating to see what the committee does this week when they come out with their first playoff rankings. Let's talk about a couple more teams kind of on the cusp. Well, at least one team that we think is definitely a national title contender, and the other one we kind of want to dunk on just a little bit. Ohio State 24, Wisconsin 10. Like I said on our preview show this week, I was so excited for this game in the preseason, in the preview season. I thought Wisconsin had a fantastic chance to knock off the Buckeyes at home. And the defense really did their part for the Badgers this week. But that offense without Tanner Mordecai running the show is just not going to scare you, to be quite honest, and not going to scare an elite defense like Ohio State. They had, Kyle McCord had a decent day. He threw a couple picks, but also a couple touchdowns. It was really Travion Henderson and Marvin Harrison Jr., 24 carries for 164 and a touchdown for Travion. Marvin Harrison Jr. got both of Kyle McCord's touchdown passes and added 123 yards. But this was another defensive slugfest for Ohio State. So you guys, have they officially changed their identities this year? At least, maybe not big picture. We don't know what next year is going to look like. And they're bringing in offensive talent for sure. But for the 2023 Buckeyes, are they a defensive-minded team?
I think Ohio State is in the process of becoming a complete team. I think that they're a much better defense right now than they are in offense. But, look at the performance tonight for Marvin Harrison Jr. You can almost hear him in the back and just going, I think I got my swagger back, right? You can almost hear him breaking out, starting to show up again after his relatively quiet start to the season. Really what kept Wisconsin in this game were the big defensive plays. They had 4 sacks, 9 tackles for loss. That's going to derail almost any offense. So if they can clean up some of that stuff on the Ohio State side, get your protection a little bit better and put your guys in positions to win on the line of scrimmage. If they can clean some of that up, I think that they're going to be a really complete team going away. I just really am wanting to see a little bit more out of McCord, right? McCord, he's a good quarterback. He's shown me that on, a few occasions. I just got to see a little bit more before I can believe he's explosive enough and consistent enough to keep Ohio State on the path they want to be on, which is competing nationally for championships.
Yeah. Defensively, obviously, Ohio State looked good tonight. They've looked good basically all year. You talk about the identity. I mean, Jim Leonard at Ohio State, obviously one of the better defensive coordinators in the game right now. And he's kind of done his job to this point this year. But offensively, like you were talking about, Garrett, I mean, it's just such a weird team. It almost feels like Florida on steroids with Marvin Harrison Jr. Like you've got a quarterback who's like pretty good and can play a pretty good game, but he's also going to make some dumb mistakes. He's not going to be a game breaker, but he's going to take the right decisions most of the time. Unfortunately for Ohio State tonight, he kind of let him down through 2 interceptions. One of those touchdown passes was completely because of Marvin Harrison Jr. and his ability to go up and get the ball.
He's a freak.
Yeah, it's outrageous. And I mean, you want to compare it to Florida a little bit more. Trevor Etienne, great running back. They got a guy in Montrell Johnson, Travion Henderson, and Mayan Williams here at Ohio State. I know Mayan Williams didn't play today, but Travion Henderson over 160 yards on the ground. Like, if this is the offense they're going to run, it works fine. It worked against Penn State, who was the top 10 team, and you know, James Franklin seems to believe they're one of the best teams in the country. I guess we'll see as time goes on if that's really true. And then you still have to play Michigan, which is obviously the biggest test for them down the stretch of the season. It's really going to be about if Kyle McCord is going to be a good enough quarterback to take them to the playoff, and the difference between being a double-digit win team with a decent quarterback and a playoff team with a decent quarterback. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to have to keep making plays. And if you want to win a national championship, if you want to do anything in the college football playoff, your defense is going to have to play really well. And they're playing really well right now. You mentioned all the sacks and tackles for loss, but the offense isn't going to win you games most of the time if you're Ohio State. Defensively tonight, though, holding a team to 10 points, you're going to win a lot of the time.
Elsewhere around the country, now it's time to dunk on a team. USC 50, Cal 49. And this one, I think, was buried on the Pac-12 network. I was driving around as this game was finishing up, and I just want to shout out the Cal radio team because I was listening to this one on the Varsity app. I was listening on College Football Blitz. Not a sponsor, could be. We love that show here as we try to keep up with all the action, but man, those guys are fantastic. They were just calling out the refs, like just dunking on Lincoln Riley the entire day. Like I love a good hometown broadcast, and that was everything that you want out of it. But man, look, Caleb Williams, we know who he is, right? He put the offense on his back. They kept battling back. Every time Cal threw a punch, the Trojan offense was obviously there to, counterpunch, and they ultimately did win the game by 1 point. But holy cow, guys, like Alex Grinch, how has he not been left on the tarmac in San Francisco?
So bad.
Right? Like, why is Lincoln Riley hitching his reputation to this guy? Because
he's got to have like dirty pictures of him or something like this.
Has to.
Why is Grinch still employed?
Has to, because week in and week out, it's like putting, big tank tires on a Ferrari that you're trying to race with, right? Like it just doesn't fit, and it doesn't fit. Maybe this is what Lincoln Riley wants. Maybe this is, the identity that he wants this team to have. We're going to score a bunch of points, and we don't care how many points you score. We're going to just try to score more than you. Okay, you're never going to win a national championship that way, and you're going to start losing recruits to other schools that they feel like they can win a national championship at. So look, again, offensively, no notes, right? The Cal defense definitely made some plays at times, but when you put up 50, I have no notes for you. But giving up 49 to a Cal offense, even on the road, is just a fireable offense in my book, especially when you pair it with all the other fireable offenses that Alex Grinch has had in his career at Oklahoma and USC.
Well, and Trey, they're a really, really close, 2-point conversion away from losing this game.
Yeah.
Any other
an epic comeback. It was 43-29 in the fourth quarter.
I feel like if that's any other team, obviously, like if USC is playing Washington in that situation, Washington just kicks the extra point and just keeps on moving.
Right.
Cal's going for 2, trying to win the game. So honestly, you could have gone to overtime and lost that game hypothetically. So yeah, Alex Grinch has just been abysmal, but sorry, you can keep going.
No, he's been garbage. He's just been worse than garbage. So I wanted to highlight a couple stat lines. So Jaden Ott obviously got his 21 carries, 153, 3 touchdowns. Good for him. He's a stud. He can do what he wants. Guys, the Cal quarterback, I don't know if you guys have heard of this guy before. His name is Fernando Mendoza.
Yep.
And I know that because I'm looking at it on the screen. And he had 340 total yards of offense today and 4 total touchdowns. You let a guy named Fernando Mendoza, he carved up your defense like that. I got all my transfers defense. Look at all the stars aligning in Southern California. To let that happen to you, I mean, if you're Alex Grinch, I almost feel like you got to be like ashamed of yourself and just say, maybe this isn't for me. I'm going to go find something else to do, because you are coaching an atrocious defensive unit that, for all intents and purposes, is costing your university a national championship with the best quarterback in the country right now, and a talented offense. Marshawn Lloyd is a great running back. You got awesome receivers up and down. You got Jerry Rice's kid playing for you. Like, what else could you want on offense? And your defense can't get it done. They just can't get it done. They cost you 2 games already. And guys, I want to ask this question. I put this on the end of the show, Doc. How many more games do we think USC wins? They got Washington, Oregon, and UCLA. And I'm really – do they lose out?
It depends on who they play in a bowl game, because maybe UCLA. Like, maybe they get UCLA at home in a rivalry game, but they're staying 7-5 right in the face to me.
It's honestly like, if you would have told me USC coming into this season was going to go 7-5, I mean, it's just honestly like beyond belief how bad the defense is. Like, it's like we talked about it on my show, and this whole preseason we're talking about, okay, we know USC's defense is going to be bad. The offense is going to have to take over. The defense is like group of 5 level bad. It's like FCS level terrible. Like, they cannot – 49 points to Cal. Like, Auburn let up 10 points to Cal, or 14 points to Cal, whatever it was. Like, 49 points to Cal's arguably third-string quarterback behind Ben Finley and Sam Jackson. Jaden Ott runs for over 150 yards and 3 touchdowns. And no disrespect to Jaden Ott, he's obviously one of the better running backs in the Pac-12, but that's ridiculous. And like I said earlier, if Cal just kicks the field goal or kicks the extra point, and goes to overtime, you still have the opportunity to win that game. I think that's definitely the right move. A top 25 team, big time name like USC, I feel like you got to go for 2 in a situation like that. But with all the 5 stars, Domani Jackson, all the transfers that they've got on defense, it's not like a lack of talent. It's clear as day that it's the coaching. And like you guys were talking about earlier, whatever means Alex Grinch is staying at Southern California for, it kind of seems outrageous at this point. Like, 49 points to Cal is ridiculous.
One last note I'll add on this. That was 49 points while getting 4 takeaways. So you took the ball away from them. You ended 4 drives of Cal, and you still gave up 49 points. I just have –
gosh, man.
No words. Terrible. And USC got by last year on the backs of those timely takeaways and some big sacks. They were a big play defense. And they just haven't gotten those consistently this year. And now even when they're getting them, they're still giving up 49 points to Cal. So, guys, we'll pick up the pace here as we get into the rest of the games we're going to cover here. Let's start in the ACC as we move coast to coast here to close this out. Florida State 41, Wake Forest 16. The Noles defense really stepped up. 5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, and they only gave up 3 of 14, on third down. 82 passing yards for the Deeks. Jared Verse 2 sacks. Florida State has a pretty I'm not going to say easy, because, anything can happen in college football, but of the contenders, they probably have the easiest path remaining. Yes.
I think so. I was looking at some of the schedules today, just kind of wondering like who's kind of got the inside track. And I think it's got to be Florida State. They play at Pitt, Miami at home, North Alabama is their kind of, tune-up game, and then at Florida. I don't think any of those games scare you if you're a Seminoles fan. And you're thinking across the country, well, the Pac-12 is going to have an electric finish. SEC, if you're Georgia, you still got big games left on your schedule. Alabama still has big games left on their schedule, if you want to call them a contender. And then obviously with Texas and Oklahoma. You have to think about, both of them facing off against each other, possibly in a championship game. Big Ten, still plenty. They have the game, and then they have whatever the championship game is going to be. I think this plus kind of the weakness of the conference, because guys, the conference really hasn't looked all that good so far this year. Plus the weakness of the conference, I think that Florida State has the inside track for sure.
Yeah, and it's tough because Florida State, it honestly does seem like they might just win the ACC championship and go straight to the playoff. And no disrespect to Louisville, but if North Carolina didn't just continuously shoot themselves in the foot when playing some of the worst FBS teams around, they would be right in contention. And I feel like they would put up a better fight on FSU than Louisville possibly would. But I guess You never know. Louisville continues to surprise me every week. So I don't know. Florida State's definitely a good team. If they lose the ACC championship, that's kind of where it gets kind of foggy. But winning out is definitely going to do the job. Like you said, Garrett, nobody to really worry about until Mario Cristobal can coach a game where it doesn't seem like everything he does is makes you want to I don't know, watching him kneel the ball out 2 times in a row to go to overtime and somehow winning the game. I have no idea how he does it, but Virginia,
I think keep getting away with this.
Yeah, they had 3 timeouts against Clemson with 50 seconds left. I know they were playing with a true freshman quarterback, but then they have Tyler Van Dyke this week, who I understand also didn't have a great game. But anyways, I digress. I don't think Miami should be a problem for Florida State. And, I don't think Florida should be a problem even on the road, even though it might get interesting. I think Jordan Travis and company have got that one in the bag.
That regional rivalry triangle definitely always has some fun stuff happen, but Florida State's clearly the best team of the 3, and I think that they've proven that they get the benefit of the doubt at this point. Going through the rest of the conference here, you guys mentioned Miami 29, Virginia 26 in overtime. Crazy finish to that one, like you mentioned, with Cristobal kneeling out the clock, but finally gets a win anyways. NC State over Clemson 24-17. Clemson is bad at football, guys, and we have to start questioning if they're going to make a bowl game because their end of the season schedule is not easy. Louisville shuts out Duke 23-0. Riley Leonard gave it his all, but I think it's really clear that he is, just not himself right now with the injuries that he's sustained the last couple of times out. Georgia Tech upsets North Carolina 46-42 in a wild game. We're starting to see the cracks in that North Carolina defense. They're doing what they did last year, starting really strong and fading as the season comes along.
And that Ramblin' Rex starting to get rolling too.
Listen, y'all's bowl prediction of Georgia Tech. You and Mitch's preseason prediction that Georgia Tech would make a bowl game has gone through so many ups and downs.
And they still have Clemson as an auto win, so that's another win on the schedule.
Listen, they got to get it done. They have Clemson and Georgia remaining, so I don't know who the other 2 are off the top of my head, but they got to get those 2 probably. They might be Clemson. Who knows? Notre Dame 58, Pitt 7. And on Thursday night, Virginia Tech 38, Syracuse 10. Syracuse might not be good. They're 0-4 in the ACC. We're still answering that question of if they're good, and I think the answers are resounding no now.
It is.
And Boston College, 1 win away from bowl eligibility at 5-3. They knock off the UConn Huskies 21-14. Guys, anything that you want to talk about in the ACC before we move on?
Okay, a couple things. Obviously, the Clemson thing, we'll talk about that in a second. Georgia Tech's finishing the season with Virginia, Clemson, Syracuse, Georgia.
Oh my God, they're going
to find 2 wins. They're going to make a bowl game, guys.
Oh my God.
I think you can chalk up Syracuse at home as a dub. I don't think they beat Georgia, so you just got to go 1-1 against Virginia and Clemson. They're going to make a bowl game, guys. Ramblin' Rex going to roll on. Let's go.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to note is kind of random, and they only beat UConn by 7, but Boston College quite literally has the opportunity to win 8 games this year. They have Pitt, Syracuse, and Virginia Tech remaining. I'm hesitant on Virginia Tech because they actually did look very good on Thursday night.
They did.
But still, Pitt is really, really bad at football this year. Syracuse in an intimidating Carrier Dome on a Friday night. I guess you never really know. But Boston College has surprised me a lot this year. Not that they've had the toughest of schedules, and I guess that kind of goes back to, Trey, what you were saying about Georgia Tech being one of the most inconsistent teams. They lost to they lost to Boston College by 15, and then Georgia Tech comes out here and knocks off North Carolina and knocks off Miami. But anyways, Boston College, fun team to watch for me so far. They've kind of been up and down, but more than likely going bowling, only 1 win away, is kind of interesting to me. They were supposed to be horrible this year, so it's fun to see.
I've really only got 2 more things on ACC. Clemson's close is Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and South Carolina. They need 2 wins.
They got to
That
get
Georgia
Georgia Tech
game becomes extremely important for them.
They got to get Georgia Tech.
They got to have Georgia Tech.
Feeling confident there.
And then the only other thing there, can we talk about Pittsburgh's coach?
Pat Narduzzi. His comments, man.
Yeah, that was pretty
Holy cow. If you want to lose a locker room, just go look at
just go tell them they're not athletes. Like, yeah, you guys not really athletes. You guys kind of suck.
He essentially said, we lost a lot of talent last year, and we thought we replaced that talent with good players, and I guess we were wrong. So the players are quote tweeting that. They are taking notice of their head coach's words, and
he's so wrong.
Could get ugly. Could get ugly.
Can I paint a picture? How about this? Pitt head coach Jimbo Fisher. Let's send him to Pitt next year. Narduzzi's out the door. He's gonna get fired. He's done. He's gone. Let's send Jimbo off to Pitt. Can reset things in College Station.
Right? Yeah, at Sicko's committee on that one. At Sicko's committee.
Manifest it, right? Circle of candles. Let's manifest this.
This is the ACC, guys. We're not supposed to talk about this. Let's move on to the Big 12. Kansas State 41, Houston 0. Big showdown, as we mentioned, with Kansas State taking on Texas next week. West Virginia 41, UCF 28. UCF still searching for that first Big 12 win. They've been so close so many times. We talked the Oklahoma game last week. They had their chances today, but West Virginia, Neil Brown syndrome lives on, and they are quietly putting together a really solid year as well. Iowa State 30, Baylor 18. Garrett, you and Mitch laughed at me when I said there's a chance that Iowa State made a bowl game this year. I just want to point out that they are 1 win away from achieving that awesome feat.
And aren't they part of that tie at the top of the conference?
They are in that 5-way tie for first place in the Big 12. Yes, they are. They control their own destiny to get to Arlington. As we
I dislike that. I dislike that.
As long as they don't pull out the pants that were like translucent, that looked like they weren't wearing pants. Yeah, as long as they don't pull those out again, they can do whatever they want. I don't care.
Keep those.
They're gonna wear those in the Big 12 championship game against like Oklahoma State.
No comment on those. But I will say, Kansas, BYU, Texas, Kansas State to close out for Iowa State. That's a tough close, but I think we can get one and get to a bowl game. And like I said, we control our own destiny to get to Arlington. So let's see what happens. The only other game in the Big 12 was, you mentioned it a couple times, Garrett, Ollie Gordon's show just rolls on. 25 carries, 271 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Guys, those are like Barry Sanders numbers for another Oklahoma State comparison. It's just ridiculous what this guy is doing. And he has, I don't want to say single-handedly, because Alan Bowman has actually been really good too. But he has almost single-handedly resurrected that program that we were almost pronouncing time of death on earlier this year after losing to South Alabama and Iowa State in back-to-back weeks. They beat Cincinnati tonight 45-13 in Stillwater.
Well, and there's just so much energy that comes with Ollie Gordon. He does it all. He's a workhorse. He's kind of that old school type of running back where you can just keep giving him the ball and he's going to keep plowing ahead. He can run physical. He's got some speed in there. He can catch the ball out the backfield. He's a good back. And pride of Trinity High School. Got to keep shouting him out. Tease up, Ollie Gordon. Let's go. I'm excited to see where he can go with this. I'm excited to watch his development continue and circle Bedlam, because this is about to be a really fun game to watch. It's going to be must-see TV as these two schools meet in Stillwater. Just got to circle that one and watch Ollie Gordon in that game, because he might be the best player on the field. Rest of the season that any game that he's playing in, he might be best player on the field.
Yeah, and it always seems like Mike Gundy finds a way to just like scrap out a bowl game, scraps out another bowl game. I said earlier 6-2, but Ollie Gordon only a sophomore. Number one, that's pretty scary because next year in the draft, him, Kinshawn Judkins, obviously from Ole Miss, probably one of the better backs in the country.
Yep.
Like, it's time to start putting Ollie Gordon's name in kind of the top of those lists for next year's draft, because 271 yards on the ground. He almost ran for more yards than Allen Bowman passed for, which is really unbelievable.
If you
because he
combine
threw
his
the ball
receiving
34
numbers,
times.
he outgained Allen Bowman.
Yeah, which is crazy. Ollie Gordon, the first game that I watched from Oklahoma State this year, most of the game from Oklahoma State was against Kansas State a couple Friday nights ago, and it was kind of one of his big breakout games. And since then, he's just kind of ran away with it. And like you said, against Oklahoma next week, I know we talked about it earlier. I don't want to be redundant, but Ollie Gordon, with a bad run-stopping defense that we saw from Oklahoma this week, Ollie Gordon could run all over him. They look good against Cincinnati, so we'll see how that goes.
And this is the same Oklahoma State team that lost to South Alabama by a not close final score at home.
Yeah. And Iowa State.
Booed off the field at halftime. And
an Iowa State team that was not what they currently are. Like, they had not figured themselves out. Like, Iowa State was reeling at that point, and that Oklahoma State win
and now they're
set them
possibly going to go to the Big 12 championship game.
Yep, exactly. So book your tickets, Cyclones fans.
Shout out Mike Gundy. He's a man.
Yeah, what?
Let's move on to the Big Ten, guys, as we keep cruising through the Power Five. Penn State. I don't think they inspired a lot of confidence in their fan base today. 33-24 at home over Indiana. I believe this was homecoming for the Nittany Lions as well. Indiana dominated stretches of this game. They had a 90-yard touchdown pass to kick off the scoring. They had another, I think, 50 or 60-yard touchdown pass in the first half. Things were not looking good in Happy Valley, and Drew Aller throws an interception late in the game, but then bounces back. He throws a long touchdown pass, 57 yards, to pay dirt to get the go-ahead and ultimately the game-winning score. They squeak it out, but I mean, Penn State, they obviously failed their test last week. The offense disappeared against Ohio State. Is it time to eliminate them as a serious contender for the national championship?
Yep, it's over, because I don't think they're going to get another real chance. I mean, they still got Michigan, so there's that, but you don't really get another real chance to make your point. And I just don't think that they're there as a team, right? This game was tied 24-24 with under 3 minutes to go.
Yep.
That shouldn't happen. Indiana at home, on the road, in the sleet, in the hail, whatever. Like, I don't care what it is. This shouldn't happen for a team that's trying to contend for a playoff spot. Nonetheless, the whole thing. So I'm willing to say that this is probably another, I don't know, New Year's Six Bowl for Penn State, and a good season, but still just James Franklin coming up short of what they expect to be at Penn State.
I'm not sure I'm completely out on them as a contender. I know they've kind of got like a trappy kind of game against Maryland, and I'm not sure if we didn't include Maryland here on the sheet because Garrett predicted them to go 10-2.
My turtles are broken. It's fine.
We're about to talk about the turtles. Don't worry.
Yeah. But Ohio State played a similar game. I know it was earlier in the season, and they ended up winning by 20 points, but it was like a 23-3 game. It was just kind of grimy. It wasn't a runaway game from Ohio State, and Ohio State still ranked in the top 5. I'm not saying it was the same game, and Indiana looked tons better in this game than they did against Ohio State. But opportunity against Michigan still looms large. I don't think they're going to come in and lay down during that game, especially at home. It's at 11 a.m., which kind of sucks in Happy Valley. But either way, that's going to more than likely be a top 10 matchup. And they win that game, they're right back in contention. And we could possibly get the death situation where Penn State beats Michigan, Michigan beats Ohio State, and then Ohio State beats Penn State, and it's like a triangle. So for humanity's sake, I hope we don't get that. But I also kind of hope we do. That'd be a good game, good situation to see play out. I'm not willing to eliminate Penn State, but like still a couple trap games with Maryland and a 6-2 Rutgers team, and then number 2 Michigan still on the schedule. So it's going to be tough. Until they lose to Michigan, I'm probably not going to eliminate them completely. But yeah, it was definitely a very sloppy game against Indiana today.
Yeah, I'm personally rooting for that triangle of death scenario where it's 3 one-loss teams, man. Like, We know the Big Ten office would just declare Ohio State the champion, though, and move on because that's what they do.
Oh.
Yeah. Garrett, 10-win Maryland is officially dead unless they win out and win the bowl game.
Yeah, I need the bowl game,
33-27 loss to Northwestern. I'm not going to make you do a eulogy here, but it was a rough scene in Evanston today.
No. Well, we can eulogize them.
Yeah,
all right, folks, we're gathered here today to eulogize my 10-win Turtles. The Maryland Terrapins, it's just falling apart at this point. I'm very sad about this. Really, for me today, it's the run game disappearing. I thought they'd have a much better run game, and they did for the first part of the season, but it's disappeared. They found out how to stop the run. And Talia can't get it done if you don't have a balanced offense. He, missed 17 of his passes today. Still had a pretty solid game, but it's not going to be good enough if that's what you're doing. So, look, I'm sad about it. Can't lie. You could still get to 10 wins with a bowl game, but I don't think that's, technically counts. And also they still have multiple difficult games on their schedule. So I'm not going to predict that at this point. So we're sad. My Turtles are broken. I'm still going to blame Mitch for picking them in the ledger and then breaking them a couple weeks ago. So
yes.
That's my only thing that's, keeping my solace right now from my broken Turtles.
Yeah, that's definitely valid. The Mitch curse is.
You will always be remembered.
Extremely real. Only other scores in the Big Ten, guys. We had Nebraska 31-14 over Purdue. Nebraska 1 win away from a bowl game in Matt Rule's first year. And Minnesota knocks off Sparty 27-12. Jordan Newman, I just want to read this stat line to you guys real quick. 40 carries for 204 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is the offense, if you want to call it that, in Minneapolis. Just like Mo Ibrahim was last year. He's picking up where they left off, and that's how they're deciding to road the boat up there. Just give the ball to the running back 40 times. And, in the Big Ten West and when playing a team like Michigan State, that can work out for you. Let's round out the Pac-12. We do have a couple games that are still live. I'll give you a quick update. In the third quarter, Garrett did, I think all three of us picked Arizona to win this game outright on our preview show. It's 13-10 Arizona over Oregon State, a really ugly score right now, but a defensive struggle in Tucson. 4:45 left in the third quarter.
If people are seeing me look over, it's because I have this game on the screen right over here. So I'm watching this game as we're going. It's been so back and forth. A lot of surprisingly good defense. I thought this would be a lot higher scoring than it was, but some pretty good defense in this game. So I'm excited to watch this one while I edit the rest of the pod tonight.
It's going to be an interesting finish there. UCLA 28-16 over the Colorado Buffaloes and Coach Prime. Arizona State 38, Washington State 27. Anything you guys want to hit on before we move on?
Yeah, I got to talk about the Colorado offensive line. It's on the similar level, probably a little bit better than USC's defense, but it's just it's honestly beyond belief how bad it is. Every time that I look up, Shedeur Sanders is running for his life behind somebody, getting hit while he throws. And it was terrible. The offense did not look good for Colorado. Travis Hunter had 2 interceptions, I think, and was putting them in a position to score on offense, and they couldn't do it. UCLA looked all right. I mean, they're kind of just floating along. I think it was their 6th win tonight.
Yep.
And they just stay ranked in the top 25. But yeah, Colorado's O-line it's terrible. Shedeur Sanders was limping around the whole game. He's getting hit while he throws every single time. If I'm Shedeur, I know they were talking about in the broadcast that he doesn't blame somebody, but at some point you just got to say, look, we have a great wide receiver room. We have a very solid running back room. We have a very solid quarterback. And we're not able to use any of it because our offensive line is probably one of the worst in the FBS. And it's going to continue to cost them games because if Colorado can't score, they're not going to get very many stops. Their defense is not good enough. And UCLA's offense is not electric. They have 3 different quarterbacks who see action, and they still gave up 4 touchdowns to them. So if Colorado's not going to be able to stop anybody and they're not going to be able to put up any points, Arizona's going to be a tough game. Oregon State next week is going to be a tough game. Washington State's not a gimme. Like, they don't really have a gimme on the rest of their schedule by any means, especially after that loss to Stanford. So we'll see. That's just something I had to point out. Watching that game after the Tennessee one this afternoon, it was a rough scene. It was a rough scene.
Well, yeah, because one of the things we pointed out preseason, even Drew, was how bad they are on the lines of scrimmage. They crushed the transfer portal, but so many of their line of scrimmage guys were from like D2 levels, or like just like looked undersized, and we're kind of like, hey, who's this guy? Like, you got to transfer, but I've never heard of this guy. Not really a big pickup. And it's starting to kind of expose itself a little bit. UCLA also pretty solid on defense, had 7 sacks in this game. It's a combination of two things. It was just a really bad matchup
defense
for
has
Colorado.
UCLA's defense has been really, really good this year.
Yeah, no, just a real bad matchup. 7 sacks, 10 tackles for losses. And like you were pointing out, Drew, bowl-bound Colorado may not be a thing this year. They came out real hot. Oregon State, I don't know. Arizona, I'm not really sure about that one. They look pretty good. Washington State, that might be a dub, but you have to go there. So, something to look at there. And then at Utah to finish your season, that's a good Utah defense. Don't let the Oregon game fool you. That's a really good Utah defense. So I'm seeing maybe one more win gets to 5-7, which we said 4-8, 5-7. That's a great improvement for Colorado. But everybody wanted to jump ahead. 8-4 is the floor. This team's going to go for the Pac-12 championship game. That was foolish from the start. We told you so. You don't want to listen to us.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what it was that forced Colorado to come out so hot. I'm not sure if their offensive line is just exhausted at this point. I'll give them a little bit of credit. I know the Murphy twins are really good on the front for UCLA. Latu up front is literally one of the best pass rushers in college football.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody really seems to talk about him too much outside of the realm of like inner circle college football fans on the broadcast. They talk about him a lot.
Well, they talk about him on the Pac-12 network all the time. Just nobody gets it. So
yeah, I couldn't even watch the game today. I didn't even get it. But anyways, yeah, I don't know what it is. Colorado's probably not going to be favored in any of those games throughout the rest of the season. Maybe Washington State, like you mentioned, but even at that point, I feel like if you say they're going to go 4-8 or 5-7, the Colorado bandwagon fans are going to be in your mentions and be like, you're hating and da-da-da-da-da. Just trying to be realistic. They should not be favored in any of the games they have remaining. Arizona, Washington State, the only 2 ranked teams they don't play. Maybe they can win those games, but either way, it's going to be it's going to come down to the wire on those 2 games for sure.
Yeah, still 13-10 Arizona over Oregon State. Under 3 minutes left in the third quarter there, but Oregon State is driving in Arizona territory. So we'll keep you updated on that one if anything crazy happens before we sign off here. Let's move on to the SEC before we get some Group of 5 highlights. Texas A&M, our Aggies get a win 30-17 over South Carolina. I saw
it counts.
It counts. Robert Behrens, one of the stalwarts of Aggie Twitter, I think said it perfectly. This was the quintessential Jimbo Fisher game. You saw some elite moments. You saw a lot of moments that made you scratch your head, and you're left thinking, well, that was positive, I guess. So they beat South Carolina. South Carolina is just, I think, ready to call it quits on the season. I do want to shout out Spencer Rattler. The broadcast highlighted him a couple times. Like, this kid has every reason to not have a positive attitude right now. His offensive line is terrible. His receivers are dropping passes left and right. But he's encouraging guys on the sidelines. He is, trying to keep his team positive. They're 2-6. And it's not looking good for him. He's running for his life. He had 3 intentional grounding penalties just to avoid getting obliterated in the first half today.
And 4 sacks. So, like, it's not like nothing was getting home anyways.
But I just wanted to shout out his attitude on the sidelines because it would be so easy to just throw in the towel and not have a good attitude, or to chew out your receiver for dropping an easy pass. But shout out that guy. He's trying his best out there and putting up some good numbers still. Ole Miss 33-7 over Vanderbilt. They celebrate the last time they get to play the Commodores every single year under the current SEC structure. So rest in peace to that rivalry, if you want to call it that. Drew, your Tennessee Vols 33-27 over Kentucky. Devin Leary did his best to play spoiler up in Lexington, but the Vols pull it out and remain an outside shot, like you said, but still a shot alive at the SEC East title. And Auburn in the battle at the bottom of the SEC West takes out Mississippi State at home 27-13. Guys, I'll give the floor to you.
Yeah, I'll start with the Tennessee game because I watched it in full front to back. And it's kind of like the Tennessee tradition, if you guys didn't know, to make a mediocre pocket passer look like he could win the Heisman Trophy the next day. We did it with Graham Mertz. We did it again with Devin Leary. So he almost got us pretty good. We limited Ray Davis pretty good. Honestly, he did not have his best of games. He's a really good running back. And, obviously he played us a couple times when he was at Vanderbilt. So I was expecting him to run all over us, and it was actually the opposite. We could not stop a passing play for our life. Our cornerback one is out, Kamal Haddon. He's down for the year, which hurts you a lot. But, I mean, ultimately, Joe Milton, I know there's been a lot of question marks around him, and I know I keep pulling it back to this, but over on our show, my buddy Ben, not the biggest Joe Milton fan, and I continue to believe in him. I feel like he had a pretty good game today.
He looks a lot better today. I'll give him credit where it's due.
He did. And the thing that I keep telling people and Tennessee fans in specific when they kind of bring up Joe Milton's struggles and, he's not playing too good, like if you just look at his counting numbers, it's really not all that bad. 1,500 yards, I think 13, 14 touchdowns after today, and over 60% completion, which quite honestly, it's not great, but it's not terrible. Like it's good enough to win you 9 or 10 games. And it's just the, I guess the hangover or, you kind of feel spoiled after having Hendon Hooker last year, who was a potential Heisman winning candidate before that injury. So Tennessee fans, I feel like, are definitely spoiled or hungover from that Hendon Hooker high of last year. I was impressed with Joe Milton today, though. He looked good. And Jabari Small, Jalen Wright, Dylan Sampson all do their thing on the ground. So glad we pulled it out. We got UConn next week for homecoming, which is a good reset game, I guess you could call it, before Missouri and Georgia back-to-back weeks, which is going to be a gauntlet.
Yeah, man, it was a good game for Tennessee. Sometimes I just feel bad for Vols fans because I feel like Tennessee can't make anything easy this year.
No,
right?
No,
it's
definitely
they go up against A&M a couple weeks ago. A&M's just garbage, can't do anything on offense, and they got to mess around with them and make it a game where you actually have to pay attention on that last drive in the fourth quarter.
Yeah,
you have this one today where Kentucky, it's been up and down, and kind of whatever, and then all of a sudden Kentucky's in this thing, and I mean it started pretty well. 10-0 after the first quarter, you're scoring and everything. All of a sudden, here come the Wildcats storming back with 17 in the second, and it's off from there. So I just kind of feel bad for Vols fans at a certain point because I feel like, just sitting here like, come on, guys. I mean, we had Hendon Hooker last year. We've thrown it all over. Everyone was blowing it up this year. I mean, what happened? Were they really worth that much? That's a good question, I guess, while we got you. Do you think that Hendon Hooker and Jalen Hyatt and all those guys, were they really worth that much to the offense that this is just regression? Or do you think it's more of the rest of the SEC's kind of figured out the scheme and what Heupel wants to do, and so there's a little bit of struggles kind of overcoming that?
I mean, I certainly think, and I think any Vol fan would say the same, Hendon Hooker, Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, all three of those guys severely missed. I mean, they would make plays that, you wouldn't really expect it, and then here's a deep ball down the sideline, that's a touchdown. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing is maybe not the SEC catching on, but it's almost like reverse psychology because obviously our old OC went to USF, Alex Golish. And so the new guy at the helm of the offensive group is Joey Halsley. And he's not been terrible, but he's definitely a little more timid. He's not going to be a guy who's going to air it out or run the switch verts on 2nd and 10. He's going to hand it off on 2nd and 10. He's going to run a tunnel screen to Squirrel White on 2nd and 10, which isn't bad. And it'll win you 8 or 9 games, and it'll get the job done against a team like Kentucky. Should have got the job done against a team like Florida, but he's not going to come out throwing the ball everywhere. I think Josh Heupel would love to do that, and I think he's going to ultimately develop Nico Iamaleava into a guy that's able to do that. But I feel like Joe Milton, although he's really not that bad, the coaching staff at Tennessee doesn't have a ton of trust in him, and they don't want to go out slinging the ball deep. And number one, forget about the run game that they have, and number two, make Joe Milton make a mistake. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit of reverse psychology where it's like we almost are too scared that they're going to catch on, so we're going to go against what you think. And that's how Tennessee, we've been doing that the whole time I've been alive. Instead of just doing what works, we try and go around what works and trick you, and it ultimately we end up losing games by doing that. So
Sure.
you're right. It is very, very enraging to watch because we'll come out in the first half, like against Alabama, run the ball really well up the middle, hit quick hitters on the curls and slants, and then we come out in the second half and run quarterback draw, handoff, punt, and we kind of forget how to run the offense. So I don't know. It's definitely a mix of both. Definitely miss those guys, but offensively, play calling wise, it's definitely taken a step back. Aggressiveness, if that's even a word, that's kind of taking a step back in my opinion.
For sure.
Yeah, I think that timid is a really great word to describe it this year. Just feels like that edge is lacking a little bit. And like you said, it's going to be fine to win 8 or 9 games and go to a really nice bowl game, but just a slight step down from the heights we saw last year.
Because, I mean, even last year, Milton looked pretty good in the Orange Bowl. I thought he looked pretty good, and I thought he played a really good game. So, and to come out this season and be a little underwhelming, I'm just kind of like, is it a scheme thing? Did they figure him out? Did they, is it just no talent anymore because Hooker and Hyatt and all them and Tillman and all those boys I don't know. I was just kind of wondering from a guy who watched them every week like you. So, not really sure.
It's just definitely like, I guess in the Orange Bowl, we were also playing without Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman.
Right.
And we had our former offensive coordinator calling the plays with basically the same personnel we have on the field, minus a couple guys up front. So it's clear to me that when we slow down the game and make Joe Milton into I'm going to read these linebackers, make the play, that type of stuff just doesn't work. He's not that kind of quarterback. He's going to have to hurry up to the line, run up to the line, and do all that good stuff. So I think it's a play calling thing, but I guess time will tell on that one.
Yeah.
Well, guys, let's run down some G5 highlights before we get out of here and sign off for the night.
Real quick scoring update, Trey, before we get there.
Yeah.
There was just a touchdown for Oregon State. Oregon State ran it in to start up the fourth quarter, so they now lead 17-13.
There we go. All right, so back and forth in Tucson we go. Long list of G5 updates this week because the race for the New Year's Six is getting pretty crazy, and the race for these conference titles is getting really fun as well. Let's start with James Madison. They held on to win 30-27. JMU goes to 8-0. I saw somebody joke on Twitter this week that James Madison and Jacksonville State should just meet up in Charlotte and play the Who's Gonna Stop Us Bowl this year. And I'm all for that. If we can figure out a way to, get that to happen, I'll donate to the GoFundMe for sure. Elsewhere in the Sun Belt, Troy looks to have control of the West, 31-13 over Texas State today. Troy gets bowl eligible. Our Bobcats have to wait another week to try to get a shot at bowl eligibility, but I think they're going to get there. They didn't get it done today, but, still a lot of time.
And that Troy defense is still dominant. That's a really good Troy defense. Stopped a really good Texas State offense.
And we said Texas State would have to jump out quickly in that game. They weren't able to. I think they went up 7-0 or 10-7 or something like that. But from there, Troy's defense really took over. That's absolutely right. Over in the American, we told you to watch out for the Rice Owls. We told you they were plucky, and they almost stole one from Tulane today, 30-28 down in Houston. And SMU just obliterates Tulsa, 69-10. Somebody bought our tickets to this game on SeatGeek, and I really hope they weren't Tulsa fans because they are it's gonna be the worst $45 they ever spent. Yeah, so that title race is heating up. UTSA also 4-0 in the American after a tough start after they beat East Carolina 41-14 today. And the only other one I have of note in the American, Memphis 45, North Texas 42. This was a wild finish with Memphis going up really big, UNT storming back, scoring a go-ahead touchdown with about 55 seconds left, and then Memphis just ripping the hearts out of the Mean Green by immediately going down the field and scoring a go-ahead touchdown of their own. Like I said, 45-42 final in that one for the Tigers. Liberty, shout out Joe in Longview, 8-0, beat Western Kentucky 42-29 on Tuesday night. New Mexico State and Diego Pavia are bowl eligible. They beat Louisiana Tech 27-24.
Not that Diego needs a bowl, but anyways.
Yes, well, he's getting to go back-to-back years, and I'm super pumped for that for him.
No, when he goes, he doesn't need a bowl though. So
yeah,
okay,
I got it. All right. Miami, Ohio, a really surprising, I think, win in this one. I think we were kind of pegging Ohio in this one with the quarterback advantage for sure. But Miami, Ohio puts up 30 on a really good Ohio Bobcat defense, 30-16.
Showed a lot of
the
resiliency after losing that quarterback last week.
Absolutely. Yeah. So shout out to the Red Hawks there. Get another one of Garrett's favorite teams after writing their preview. And then Air Force rolls on to 8-0. They are in the driver's seat for New Year's Six Bowl right now. Colorado State had some fantastic uniforms tonight, and that snow. I think we got our first snow game of the year, if you guys saw the pictures of that. But Air Force wins this one 30-13. And I need to do a score check really quickly. We've got UNLV and Fresno State.
Yeah, I think Fresno State was leading by 4 when I last checked.
Yeah. I got 24-17 Fresno
State. So they kicked the field goal.
So they kicked a field goal to add on to that just now. So, Fresno State up by a touchdown at home in a battle at the top of the Mountain West as well. So a lot of action this week, guys. We take a deep breath. We take it all in. We have our first playoff rankings coming out this week. So the calendar's turning November. Pressure's going to heat up, and we're going to see who truly our contenders are for the national championship this year. Drew, thanks so much for joining us, man. Thanks so much for pinch hitting tonight. Tell the folks where they can find your work and where they can follow along with you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I really do appreciate you guys having me on. Love what you guys are doing and definitely keep up with your stuff. But you can find us over at @so_boy_sports on Twitter, X, whatever they're calling it nowadays. Over on Instagram, it's at @southern_boy_sportspod. And new episodes out usually every Tuesday. Been working through some technical difficulties, but they've been up on Wednesdays most of the time for the past couple of weeks. So similar situation, talking college football every week, me and my buddy Ben, and looking to ramp up as we go down the stretch. But again, thanks again for having me on, and it certainly was a blast. I love what you guys are doing.
Absolutely, man. The pleasure's ours. Well, for Garrett Turney, for Drew Hull, for Mitch Mason, who could not be with us tonight, I'm Trey Reeves, and we will see you guys next time.
Gracious him. How about